All right, welcome back, everyone. This is actually class 2, even though it's in the middle of the semester. Okay, so second class of the A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. I'm actually happy that we're doing it here at Skydeck. How many of you have been to Skydeck before? Okay, so I'm going to say like half of you have, or the other half didn't raise your hands. But I think, given that it's an entrepreneurship topic, I think it's great that we're going to do it here at Skydeck. The other thing is, I think this leads to really a much more intimate setting, and I think it'll also lead to more dialogue between the class and the speakers. And so I'm hoping that this format will basically be more positive for everyone. Now, just one little administrative announcement. Hopefully, you are thinking about your projects, about the 5 videos and the summary of it. I understand that and by the way, that's actually due April 6th. It's not really that far away. I think a Google link has just been sent out. And one thing that we're asking you to do is just to tell us what category, among all the different categories, that you're going to be looking at in terms of the 5 videos that you're going to give us some summary back, okay? So it's still due April 6th and all, but just fill out the topic, the one topic that you're going to pick. And if you pick it and you find that you want to switch, and there's some reason why you want to switch, that's okay. But I think we need a first cut of what people are looking at in terms of the videos that they're going to summarize. All right. So with that, that's my really only administrative announcement here. So with this, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Stephen Sinofsky. And he's got really an impressive background. I'm super happy that he's made himself available to speak here in our series. He's currently on the board of Andreessen Horowitz, which I think you're probably aware. It's a very famous venture fund. And in fact, Mark Andreessen, you might not know this, was actually the very first speaker of our series, of this exact series, but in 2006, I think. It's been some time. In terms of Stephen Sinofsky, his current positions, so as I said, he's on the board of Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. He's an executive in residence at the Harvard Business School, and he's an advisor of another company that I think I've seen someone's T-shirt here, Box.net, was wearing. And he's, I don't know the exact number of years, but seems to be a very significant number of years at Microsoft, having some very significant positions in Microsoft, including president of the Windows division. And as part of that, includes the development of Windows 7, Windows 8, Surface, and SkyDrive. He's also co-author with HBS professor Marco Iancitti, One Strategy, Organization Planning, and Decision Making. So basically, he's drawing on expertise from technology, from product management, and global markets. He spent a year in China, in fact, or sometime in China with Microsoft as well, leading the China side of Microsoft. So with that background, now he's with Andreessen Horowitz, and he's focusing and bringing that experience to bear for new ventures. So it's really my pleasure to be able to have him, to introduce him, and to have him here today to speak with you. All right, Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have a chance to talk with you. We also have some folks listening in a simultaneous translation in Russian, so здравствуйте. And that was 2 years of college Russian at work there. I actually had a whole sentence in my head, but I couldn't get it to come out just now, so I'm going to stop trying. So we could talk about a lot of things today, and I know many of you are really on the verge of deciding what you want to do when you grow up. So am I. And so what I thought would be fun is I'm going to just share a little bit of my own story and how I got to the point where I'm standing up in front of you guys sharing my story with you. But what I really want to do is make sure that we have plenty of time for discussion and questions and answers. And I think we end at 6, is that correct? 6:30. So we have tons of time, and really just an opportunity to talk about whatever topics are.
Yeah, the time is really a flexible format. Go ahead and present as you like, and we're not under an obligation to go to the end of time.
Okay, the end of time? That would be...
The end of time of the class, only to go to the end of time of everyone's collective interest.
Is that a test for me? Like, oh, okay. Because if you guys start leaving like in 4 minutes, then I will be offended. And on the other hand, if I dart out the door to avoid traffic. Okay, in any event, I just want this to be an opportunity for you to really just gather some insights and see what we can stitch together in terms of careers. I think that the most interesting thing for me, and we'll come back to this as we go through it, is that really you're in school to learn and to develop a bunch of tools to equip yourself to make a lot of decisions as you go forward. There's a tendency for where you are now to think that you could develop this master plan. Like if I take this class, study this thing, do this thing, get this internship, then the following 8 things will happen throughout the course of your career. I don't want to be the first person after your parents to tell you it doesn't always work like that, that it's actually that there's a lot of things at play. And the most important thing to think of about the time you have now is that it's really giving you the skills to deal with the changes as they come up. And not just the changes, but the moments in time that are just pure luck and coincidence. And to help you, your tools that you're developing now are the things that are going to help you identify, wow, maybe this is just some opportunistic lucky thing that I should jump on. And I think that for me really just starts with the beginning of my career. So I went to college at Cornell. It's a lot like this school, except substantially colder. And boy, this weather, I don't know how you get any work done ever. At least at Cornell, it's like snowed for like 9 months of the year, so you have no choice but to study. And I studied computer science and chemistry. And that's kind of a weird combination. And at the time, so now we're in the 80s. Most of you don't remember the 80s, but in the 80s, there weren't like computers everywhere, and like you didn't really get a chance to. It wasn't ubiquitous. In fact, when I showed up at Cornell, your introduction to computers was they gave you an IBM mainframe punch card, and on the punch card was your email address, which was good for mailing to other people on that same computer. So there was no internet. There was no network. There were just that computer. It was called Cornell A. And I could send mail to everybody else on Cornell A. But my roommate was on Cornell B. And so I couldn't send him mail. My email name was the mostly memorable tguj@cornella.edu. 4 random letters. And that was how my introduction to mainframe computing. But before that, I was excited about getting that because before that I was lucky. And my father, to run our family business, which I learned later in life when I started spending time out here, a family business is also my father, the entrepreneur. But I didn't know that at the time. We just had a family store. But apparently that's being an entrepreneur now. And he wanted to help running his business, so he bought one of the earliest computers you could buy. It's about this big. It was the first business computer. So I got really lucky because he bought a business computer when all my friends were getting gaming consoles, like Atari to play Pong and things like that. So I got really lucky that he bought a business computer. So all my friends were playing games, and I'm at home like I can use a spreadsheet. Like the very first spreadsheet called SuperCalc on these old style computers. Had a 5-inch screen, it weighed 28 pounds. It had 2 90 kilobit floppy drives, so literally like not enough storage to hold one picture from your phone. And it had a spreadsheet and a word processor, like what everyone when you're 16 dreams of. And so I got my exposure to computing started with that, and it was really lucky. And I didn't know any better, and it seemed like I got to Cornell, I'm TGUJ, I was going to go to medical school, like my mom had intended, and but I really wasn't good at chemistry. the understatement of the year. I completely sucked at chemistry. And I barely made it through. And I had a warning sign, a lucky warning sign, which was in my first semester freshman year in chemistry. Cornell's chemistry class was like sort of this notorious thing like freshman chemistry is in most schools, except Kurt Vonnegut, the author, had written about it and said people go crazy in this class. And 2 weeks into class, the professor stands up in front of the room and says, and I'll change his name to protect the innocent, says we should all congratulate Mr. Smith. His project on the space shuttle is doing particularly well during this experiment that he's running. And I'm like, seriously? I'm in this class and the guy down at the other end of the aisle has an experiment on the space shuttle. I'm thinking chemistry isn't really going to be my deal. And my grades prove that. But I really like computers and I just kept doing them both. But surprisingly enough, I ran into a chemistry professor my senior year who found out I was majoring in computers, and he's like, wow, we have no one who knows anything about computers in the chemistry department. And because they're chemists. And so he invited me over, and all of a sudden, I'm like literally enrolled in the honors program in chemistry with my C average in chemistry classes. But through that, I started to get exposed to regular people using computers. Like I was using the very first graphical interface computer. Some of you know the famous story of Steve Jobs visiting Xerox PARC. Well, I used that computer, that kind of computer, a Xerox Star, to do my resume and my graduate school applications on. And I printed it on a laser printer. I also did my chemistry lab reports, which my professor, Brunya, thought were amazing. Remember, one of my reports was beautiful. They looked like they were camera ready for his chemistry journal. 2 columns, formulas, images. And he wrote on my junior year report, he wrote, amazing presentation, crap content. So I learned in an early part of my college career, form over function is not the best approach for grades. But through that luck, I started to get a broader sense of computing and the role that it could play in society. I decided to, early on in my academic career, I wanted to be a professor. And so I went to graduate school, and I went to the University of Massachusetts, which is a little bit further south, but not warm. And a lot like Cornell, it's cold all the time. But, graduate school wasn't, I was doing fine, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't turning out to be what I thought, which is, sort of that first thing that happens when my plan just wasn't working out. Like I had my plan. I was going to go to graduate school. I was going to study programming languages and databases. Then I was going to go be a professor and all would be good. And all of a sudden at step 1, things aren't really playing out the way I felt, like in terms of motivation and excitement. But I happened to be at a Association Computing Machinery conference, and this program I had written for my chemistry honors thesis was up for some award, which was neat, but it wasn't the most important thing at the time. But I won, and as soon as I won, the Apple was a sponsor, and I won an original Macintosh. That's how old it was. It was called the Mac II. It was the first color one. And I won that. And then the Microsoft sales representative for upstate Western Massachusetts or whatever came up to me and said, hey, would you like any Microsoft software to go with your Apple Macintosh? And now you guys laugh and think, wow, that would be great, free Microsoft stuff, except for the fact that nobody on earth knew what Microsoft made. This was like 1988, and nobody knew what they made. They didn't make anything any normal person used. If you were in a business, they made the products that's used in spreadsheets. I had seen them in internships. I worked at a big, giant military contractor. And then, but I said, yeah, what do you guys make? And she's like, a word processor. I'm like, you guys make tech? And that was a joke about Unix there, guys. And she said, no, we make Microsoft Word. I'm like, awesome, no use for it, but send it away. So they sent it to me, and I put it on this brand new Macintosh, and it just crashed constantly. Yeah, I know, some things haven't changed. But what was fascinating is I sent her a letter, because they didn't have email. There was no email on her business card, and I can tell you that in a second. But I sent an email, and I complained that I said, you sent me this buggy software. I got in reply mail, like a week later, the recall notice for this product. So it turns out it was the first product that was recalled in the software world. And so then I sent it in, got new copy back, and they fixed it. And what was fascinating about the whole thing was, I'm like, wow, I should go work on this and help them fix it. And so it seemed like a neat idea. Oops, that was a mistake. And so that lucky moment of winning this product, finding out. So I sent my resume into Microsoft, made with my Xerox star, and I sent it in to the address on the box of the software. Box 14350 Northeast 32nd Way or some address, not One Microsoft Way, which is the address now. The street hadn't changed yet. And like a week later, a recruiter calls me and says, "Hey, you should come work at Microsoft." I'm like, okay. So I get on a plane and I'm interviewing at Microsoft. And it was an amazing experience. And you see, this is all luck. Like this was not part of my master plan. And so I'm like, now I'm adapting. And what was fascinating about the interview process was all of those things I had learned in college that I had thought I was not going to use. Like I was going to be programming languages and databases. But Microsoft was an operating systems company and an apps company. We called it apps in the 80s. And then it went away for like 30 years. And now it's apps again. But we called it, and so all of a sudden, all of that stuff that I didn't pay as much attention to in college was coming back to be really important during the interview process. And so all of a sudden, people are asking me about page tables and virtual memory and processes and threads and all this stuff. And I'm like, hey, I sort of remembered that. And so, I was prepared for this lucky moment in dealing with these things. And then before you know it, I get this job offer, and I'm deciding, do I really want to leave graduate school and do all this? And so I end up, I go and accept the offer, and I end up in the group that I want to be in that's doing like programming languages and things like that. And so, things had changed a lot. But all of a sudden, I'm working on Microsoft's, if you've used any of the products for development, it's called Visual Studio, and it's the big development environment. Actually, it wasn't Visual Studio. It was just called Visual C++ back then. Actually, it wasn't even Visual yet. It was just C++. Technically speaking, it was just called Microsoft C back then, because that's all there was. And our job was to make it C++, then to go and make it Visual, and then to turn it into a studio. And that would be the first 5 years of my career at Microsoft, were each of those sequence of things. But it was really just sort of this luck and coincidence that ended up that I got to the job there. But the product that I worked on that I felt most proud of during that time was the class libraries for writing C++ programs for Windows. So now we're at like 1992, 1993. Windows had just started to become used. To put a number on it, back then, the installed base of computers around the world, of personal computers around the world, was probably about 50 million. So there's about 1 billion PCs in use today. But that was all of them in the world, was like 50 million. It was crazy. And so I was working on all these products. And so then one of the things I did a lot was go back and visit Cornell and help recruit more people to go work at Microsoft. And so I'm back at Cornell. Remember, it's sunny and warm and all sorts of nice there. And it's the middle of February. And all of a sudden, it starts to snow a lot. And I'm sitting at the center of campus thinking, I'm never getting back to Seattle. I'm looking out the hotel window, and the snow is just piling up. And it turns out I, in fact, am not going back anytime soon. And I'm completely trapped on campus. The Ithaca, New York airport, it's, like the movies. It's a strip. There's just like one gate, one plane comes and goes a day, and that's it. And there's no driving because you're in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm like, okay, I'm now going insane. There's nothing to do. Like it's not like I know what I'll do. I'll just take out my phone and start looking at Facebook. Like it's 1992, there's nothing to do. Television gets 4 channels. The thing you do to entertain yourself is you call up this phone number at work to listen to your voicemail. That's it. And then you could dial up over a phone line to read your company's email. That's it. And otherwise, there's 4 channels on television, and there's no stores, and everything is closed because of the snow. So I do what every alum does, and I promise all of you will do this as well, which is, well, I'm on campus, I'm old, I'm just going to go wander around to the places that I used to go to, and then bother the students. If any of you have jobs that involve, working with other people visiting, you know that these old people show up, and then they start telling you what it was like when they were there. Yeah, that was me. So what do? I go to the computer place that I worked. So I worked in one of the computer centers that had all, which of course you don't really need now because everybody has a computer. But back then, remember the IBM mainframe, there were all these terminals. And so they were just literally these 25 lines by 80 characters connected to the mainframe that was out at the airport. And you picked, did you want the Cornell A1 or the Cornell B1? And that's what you did stuff. All you could do was really just basically nothing. And so, I go and it's empty because it's snowing and nobody can get to the computers. And so I sit down and there's a guy there and I start talking to him. And of course the guy has like work to do. I'm like, cool. He's like, there's no people. I'm just going to do my homework. And here I am bothering him. And it's now 1993. And so there's Macintoshes, there's PCs, there's digital equipment, mini computers. And so I'm just curious, like, what's different? And I'm sitting out, I can visualize it right now. I'm sitting like on the little reception desk, like, so when I was here, and I watch his eyes roll and I just ignore it because I'm old and I'm an alum and I can do that. And so I'm like, yeah, we only had computers, terminals to the mainframe and we couldn't do anything. And he's like, yeah, we do everything on the internet now. Since 1993, like there is no internet yet. And so I'm like, I knew what it conceptually was. And by that point, my Microsoft business card had finally put my email address for Microsoft on it. When I first started, we had our telex number, which is like some old thing like the telegraph that you could do, and it had a fax number, but it didn't have your email address. And there was no company email yet. And so he starts telling me about how you do stuff on campus now. And he's like, yeah, like, do you remember you used to have this thing? Like, they got rid of it my freshman year, this guy's telling me. It was called CU Info. And it was this campus-wide information thing. And you would go up to one of the mainframe terminals and you would type CU Info on a command prompt. And then you would type, like, weather. And it would give you, like, the weather for Ithaca, which you didn't need to know, just cold and snow. And then you would, you wanted to know, like, course listings. And you would type courses. And then you would type, like, com space S for computer science, and then you would type a number like 100, and then it would tell you the meeting location and time. And it was all like playing an old style adventure game. Like you would just type command prompts, and then it would tell you, ooh, pick up the sword and stuff like that. And then, but that was what it was. And so he then went to a Macintosh and showed me how to use CU Info on this new style thing. Like we would call it a browser today and the web, but they didn't know what to call it yet. Like, there's no such thing as Netscape. Mark Andreessen was still in college. And there was a Cornell law student who wrote a web browser called Cello. And there were all of these other programs. There was FTP and Gopher and Waze and all of these things that were different protocols. And so I'm just soaking this all up. And I'm thinking, I'm at Microsoft and we're not using any of this stuff. And we're supposed to be like a tech company. And so what I do is I send some mail, and I send some mail to people. I'm like, hey, this Cornell place is totally Wired. And Wired magazine, which I understand you just had him here, last semester. That was a brand new magazine. And so like that was like the cool phrase when something was wired. It was either wired or tired. That was actually a column in the magazine. And so like this stuff was all wired and it was pretty cool. And then this guy says, look, you're kind of bothering me, the computer kid. He's like, you're bothering me. Why don't you go talk to this guy that works for the provost of computing? And he's probably bored and he doesn't have homework. So I go to the guy's office and it turns out he was my boss from when I was in college and he'd just been promoted to be some bigwig. And so he's like, oh, good to see you. Hey, I want to show you this. And so he brings up on his Macintosh, which is, a color screen like the one I just won. And in the little corner is a postage stamp-sized video image. And he's like, that is the stadium that they're building for the Lillehammer Winter Olympics. And I'm like, neat. He's like, no, this is a live picture. And I'm actually watching the first live video transmission over the internet through this program that was called CU See Me. Get it? Cornell University, CU See Me. It turns out this was one of the earliest internet startups in Ithaca, New York, made up of people who thought about doing video. It was actually the first use of UDP protocol. Like nobody had ever used lossy transmissions like this before, and they figured out how to send video at 1 frame per second with no audio, and this big. And so he's like, oh, tune in, stay here. In an hour, we're going to have a global classroom. And so I'm like sitting there, and like an hour later, and he puts this camera on us, this black and white video camera. It's like this big. And we're now transmitting this to a classroom like in Ohio somewhere. And there's a bunch of kids, like 5-year-olds, who are supposed to learn from another group of kids that's 5 years old. And we're all watching this live thing. There's nothing you could do. It's this big. But it's actually happening over this public internet that up until that point had basically been the way I used it. That's how like our collaborators at other universities, we changed files over FTP and stuff like that. But all of a sudden, I'm watching kids in a classroom over video on the internet. So I got all excited, sent this mail back to all the folks at Microsoft, and I found out that there were like a small set of people at Microsoft who were already working on the internet. So here's this luck again. Like, it was lucky I was caught in the snow. It was lucky that guy working on C++ stuff was caught in the snow, who found the people at the other part of Microsoft working on this internet stuff. And we started just sort of rallying the troops. And you know, this is exactly, now you talk about disruptive technologies that everybody hears about. Well, here was Microsoft building Windows 95. That was the project going on. And all of a sudden, here was like basically these two kids back from college recruiting trips telling everybody about the internet that had nothing to do with building Windows 95, building what would become Windows Server, called Windows NT back then. But you know, Microsoft was such an amazing place that it embraced those ideas. And everybody was like, okay, how can we use the internet? I remember I met like a person who worked in sales who was like, you know, it turns out every month we take a CD and we press all of the data sheets and catalog pages and descriptions of all the products. We put it on the CD and mail it out to everybody in the field at Microsoft, the field sales organization, all around the world in like 100 different countries. So why don't we just use the internet? I'm like, hey, good idea. Think of it like there was no internet, nobody knew this, and the salespeople got all excited, and all across the company, everybody started getting really excited. And so we worked on it, and there was and then all of a sudden I was at, I had heard about this new program that had come out, and it was called Netscape Navigator. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be cool. And so I download it, and I'm playing with it. And then I go to a conference in Chicago called Windows World. Back then, there was a big conference called Windows World. And I walk over, and there's this booth for Digital Equipment Corporation, which was a giant company that doesn't exist anymore, and back to disruption. And there's a guy in the booth with the sign. It says, it's a digital equipment booth. And at these big trade shows, the big companies often allow smaller companies to have like a table or like a small place. And so Digital Equipment, giant, huge company, had a Netscape table. And I look over, and there's a Netscape table, and there's this really tall guy with a lot of hair, and I also had a lot of hair. And I go over, we're laughing because that turns out it's Mark Andreessen. And so I go over, and I introduce myself, and I'm like, hey, you have hair and tall. I have hair, not tall. We're kids. No, that's just how I look at it now. And I like, I'm talking to him, and I'm like, I had put this little Easter egg in every program that was written with Visual C++ to know that it used our tools. So it was just this, it wasn't like my initials or anything. It actually just said AFX, MFC, or some acronym. And I had noticed that Netscape Navigator used our tools, and that was super exciting. So I'm like, I go up to him and I start asking him, like, so tell me about using Visual C++, because, you know, that's what dorky people do when they meet strangers, is immediately ask them about the development tools that they use to build their product. And he has no idea what I'm talking about. And I'm all dejected. And I just leave, and I'm thinking, I just met this guy who's got this famous program that used my tools, and he doesn't even know about my tools. What kind of poser is this guy? And so I finished my little trip report, and I'm like, oh, and by the way, that Mark Andreessen guy's a total poser, doesn't know anything about Visual C++ or Microsoft Foundation classes. I don't know what the deal is. But it's really a cool program, and we should look at it and stuff like that. And so save that story. And the next thing for me is I end up changing jobs, and I go to work on Microsoft Office. And I got lucky again. It turns out my boss had been an early employee in the Office team, and he said, really, just go to the Office team. You'll enjoy it a lot. And I got really lucky, because when I joined the Office team, it wasn't called Office yet. It was actually like the Word team, the Excel team, the PowerPoint team. And they were all in independent businesses. And so a really good business case in terms of, like, hey, the competitive market was for spreadsheets, and the Excel team had to go compete with Lotus 1, 2, 3. The competitive market for word processors was against WordPerfect, and they had to compete with WordPerfect. And presentation was a very early category, but there was a company here in the Valley called Harvard Graphics, or Software Publishing. They made Harvard Graphics. And so each of those groups was really focused on the market and what customers were buying. And very few customers back then were running more than one of those programs. As crazy as that seems, there were people who were bankers who used Excel and never used word processing. And there were people who were teachers who would use presentations, but never a word processor or a spreadsheet. And it was this big moment where the company decided that really we think that everybody should use all of these. And so as luck would have it, my job was to help bring all the teams together and help be part of the effort to turn these apps into an Office suite. And we did all sorts of stuff to bring them all together and to have them look and feel like one product and one company, while we were also doing a lot of internet stuff and things like that. And I worked on Office for a really long time, like 12 years. So I worked on a whole bunch of different releases of Office. I worked on Office for Windows 3.0, Office 95, Office 97, Office 2000, Office, I'll get to when you were born eventually, Office 2002, Office 2003, Office 2007. And then I got really lucky, actually, in the late 90s. Again, luck. I went back. I was on another recruiting trip. This time I went to a very snooty school in Boston, to remain nameless. And I had a friend who had worked on Office. She was actually one of the marketing people who helped to market the paperclip. And so we had, it's cute now. Back then, let's talk about that at some other point. So, we'd always had this sense of camaraderie because we survived Clippy together. And so I sent her mail. Email had been invented by then. And I'm like, hey, I'm in town. And she's like, you have to come to class tomorrow. So it turns out I didn't know she was in school. I just knew and so she was actually getting her MBA at the snooty school. And so I go to her class. I'd never been to the business school before. It's on the other side of a river. It's like really grown-up-y. They have like their own campus. It's all different. And I go into this classroom. It looks nothing like any classroom you've ever seen. It looks like a movie set. You walk in and it's like a stadium seating. The professor walks in, has a giant poster with pictures of all the students who sit in assigned seating with their name cards. I mean, it's spooky. And then I'm like, I figured I'd just go sit in the back like I did for 6 years of college and graduate school and everybody would ignore me. But sure enough, I have to sit right in the front. I have to get introduced and everybody applauds and welcomes me to class. And I'm kind of freaked out. All the professors are wearing coats and ties. It's like full-on Harvard Business School. And it turns out he starts teaching and he's like, first words out of his mouth, Microsoft Word. Was it a success or a failure? And so I had no idea. I had never seen how these courses are taught in business school or anything. So it's not a lecture at all. It's actually like a big giant series of people asking each other questions. And apparently they get graded on it in some way without having to ever answer them. But it's a fantastic, amazing way to learn and teach. It's called the Socratic method. And you ask a question, and then the professor asks a question back. The professor asks a question, you get to ask a question back. And some student says something, you ask a question of that student. And it's question after question after question. And they studied the success or failure of Microsoft Word. And I'm like, hey, I was here. I know about it. I was there. But that's not, you're not allowed to do that. You have to just watch them talk about what you worked on. And that's the whole deal. But it was incredible. I mean, think about that. It was totally lucky. Like, I literally was just trying to go and have a drink with a friend of mine that I had worked with. And then I end up in this class. And so then the professor was like, let's go have that drink now. And so we're at this place in Harvard Square that everybody goes. And he's like, you have to come and spend time here. I'm like, I have a job. He's like, no, so it turns out Microsoft has a sabbatical program. And so I go and spend a semester at a school I never went to that rejected me like at least 4 times in my life. And I learn about learning. And like all of a sudden my horizons were expanded. And it was fascinating because it was during the dot-com bubble, basically, that I was there. So I spent an entire semester with students asking me, why do I still work at a dead company in 1999? And it was fascinating to just go through that. It gave me a chance to energize and reflect and think about the things that I'd worked on. And then my office job continued, and we did a bunch of other things in office. We, lots of really interesting work in terms of trying to reinvent the category year after year, introducing, the first servers that became part of Office, things that are called SharePoint in the business world today, expanding it with new products like OneNote that some of you might use from class and things like that. And, all part of an amazing team. And just a really great phase, which then led me to work on Windows, a whole new set of challenges. And it was really just, again, like I wasn't thinking of going and doing that, and it just sort of, the opportunity presents itself, and you're like, okay, I guess that's what I'll go do. And the company had gone through some challenging times in terms of releasing the previous Windows product, and we had to go and get things moving again, and get the energy back, and get the mojo back, and went and did that, and that was Windows 7. And then, working on a new product that was Windows 8, when you're faced with all sorts of things going on in the environment, mobile phones and tablets and the iPad and iOS and Android and changes in the economics of our industry and all these things, and trying to build a product, during those times. It's really putting to work all of those lessons and all of those experiences and bringing it to where I am now. And then one of the fascinating things was I went back, talked to my friend at Harvard, and we wrote a book together, which we talked about earlier. And so it wasn't like in my list of things to do, write a book. And it turns out like I'd written a bunch of blog posts internally, and we tried to turn it into a book. It was a little bit more weighty and academic than you might want to read, but feel free to buy a copy, and that will double the number of people who bought it. But then it was time for me to have a change, and it was time for me to do something different, and really get some new perspective. And so I was talking to a former Microsoft board member who said, hey, you should come down here and have dinner and meet some people that you haven't had a chance to meet. So I'm like, cool, sounds great. So get to this restaurant in Palo Alto, which now is 100 yards from where I live. And I go and I sit down, and I'm like, hey, there's this tall guy who used to have a lot of hair. And it's Mark Andreessen. And I had not met him since that time when I thought he was a poser. So of course, what's the first thing I have to do? I'm like, dude, you did not know anything about how Netscape was written. But for like 20 years now, you've been like sort of the guy who invented Netscape and all. And he's like, what are you talking about, crazy person who also used to have hair? And I'm like, well, I asked you all about using Visual C++ and MFC. And he's like, I did the Mac and Unix version. I never worked on the Windows version. That was the other guy. I'm like, oh. And he's like, yeah, and I wrote those all like by myself. And so it turns out he wasn't really a poser. And all that stuff he'd done was completely real, and he was a total genius. And it was just that I happened to ask him about the one thing he had nothing to do with at that point. And it's not like I hung around to ask all those questions, because of course, as soon as he didn't know, I'm like written him off. And so good lesson in how to listen and ask more questions and stuff that I could have used. But it was fascinating. And so just like my friend at Harvard said you should come hang out, Mark said you should come out hang out at Andreessen Horowitz. Having learned my lesson about how valuable that was the first time, that it happened by luck, here I am once again having a dinner with some, lucking into a moment. So I just went and I've been hanging out there, and I've been having this great opportunity to learn about the venture world, which is completely different than the world of large, established companies. Even though Microsoft, when I started at Microsoft, there were under 3,000 people, and the trailing 12 months of revenue was like $1 billion. And it's giant now. I don't even know what the numbers are. But I was there for all of that, and now all of a sudden, I just have this amazing opportunity to work with brand new companies, just like the ones that are out here on the Sky Deck, and ones that I saw this morning down in Berkeley, whichever downtown that direction is that I'm lost. And yeah, I think we're in the middle of it, so I could kind of point anywhere and be right. And work on helping new companies and use the experience that I have, and hopefully bring something to the table as they try to grow the next big thing. And so that's how I got here. But I think just a reminder, like, as you work out your master life plan, that's great. You should have that. But along the way, like, some little things are going to happen, and you should just say yes to them and see where that leads you. The tools that you're getting in school are not necessarily tools to just implement your plan, but they're tools to help you cope with the things that you run across, the unknowns, the opportunities that present themselves. So with that, I want to just open it up to questions about whatever it is that people would like to talk about, unless this is the part where it's a test to see how interesting I was and you're all just going to run out the door. But really, just feel free to ask away, and I'll be more than happy to do my best. Yep, there you go. Sure.
So you already talked about, like, maybe our master plans aren't, our lives aren't going to go according to those plans. Like, what's another thing you wish you knew when you were our age? 21, about to graduate, going to work.
Here's a lesson that I've learned literally in the past 15 months or so. Once you get going in your career, it's a defense mechanism, and it's perfectly natural for everybody, particularly engineering brains, where you're constantly in this triage mode. Is this critical to the problem at hand, or is it not critical to the problem at hand? And so you basically spend most of your time saying no as an engineer. And it turns out if you get really good at doing that, you extend it to all parts of your life. Like, should I get my car serviced or not? Should I do this thing in our apartment? Should I? And you just get good at triaging what's the most critical thing. And it turns out you end up foreclosing a lot of potential opportunities. So one of the rules I made for myself over the past 15 months was I would basically say yes to anything. And it's amazing. There's this Jim Carrey movie. So let me tell you how funny that is. I'm telling this story to a guy that I happened to meet because I said yes to something, and it turns out he's a movie producer. This guy, I'm in LA, I'm at Dan Tana's Italian restaurant, which is like hip, cool place if you know anything about anything in LA, which is not me. And I'm sitting here talking to this guy, and I'm like, Greg, you gotta just say yes to more stuff. And I'm like doing this, and he's like, yeah, like Jim Carrey. And I'm like, yeah, I made that movie. I'm like, okay. So, but a lot of stuff is different if you resist the temptation to triage, which is a natural engineering behavior. And I think it's particularly true. One of the things that I do observe that's very different between founder entrepreneurs and people who just join startups or people who are engineers in big companies is that founders are really, really good at this balance of when to say yes, even though they know people who work for them are going to triage it to a no. And you have to learn to say yes more to found a company because you don't know where the next opportunity is going to come from. But if you say yes too often, no one's going to work for you because they're just going to think you're crazy. And so finding that balance where you're just not the person who's constantly triaging and saying no. It makes for great stories. You get like Apple who it's brilliant. They just talk about we say no to far more things than we say yes to, which of course that you have to do that. But you have to say yes to some things too. And so finding that balance, because there is no risk-free path through any of this. You're either going to risk missing out because you say no too much, or you're going to risk having to juggle too many things, but you have to find that medium. And I think if I would have said yes to more things that popped up, even though I told you a story about saying yes to a bunch of random stuff. I said yes to a recruiting trip to go to Cornell, even though it was February, which I went to school there for 4 years. I know, don't go to Cornell in February. You will get trapped. Literally, at least 6 times I went on recruiting trips in February and got trapped. It was just that 1 year I got trapped and discovered that they were using all this cool internet stuff that I didn't know about. Other stuff? Come on, that was such a good question. You must be more of them. Yeah.
How did you, transition from someone with a more technical background into a managerial role? Because I think these days a lot of times, let's say you're really good at programming and people want to keep you in that role. So how did you make that transition? And what books or models or philosophies do you recommend?
Sure.
In general, what do you recommend?
Sure. Well, of course, I have to push back a little bit on the characterization that I became non-technical when I became a manager. Yeah. That's sort of the first thing. I do think that one of the areas that Microsoft really was innovative in was certainly relative to the incumbents of the era, like IBM. IBM was very much about having technologists be leaders in the company, and even though you're not writing code, it was really important to stay connected and hands-on with the code. And I think any company that any of you are going to join that's in the software and services world, you're not going to see this split where managers are not really, are either like literally non-technical, or are so divorced that all they do is care about allocations and budgets and resources. I don't think that that's a successful model for a modern corporation anymore. That's not to say you won't find people like that, but it just isn't the model. And it's really just, the way we always used to think about it is, most of you wouldn't want to work for a person who doesn't understand your job. Like, you would then not know what to talk to them about. Like, if you're a developer or a tester or a product person, and you want to talk to your boss, you want to talk to them about development or testing or product, not about your budget or resource allocation or the next ad campaign or something. You want to really be focused on that. And I think it's one of the principles of the Andreessen Horowitz is a strong belief in the technical founders of the companies. And so we look for that when we go to fund and partner with companies for places where, and we hope and work super hard so that those founders can scale to become CEOs of the company, and not just do this sort of old, what I would say is the old generation model of you get like the MBA to start a company who hires out some developer, you get a developer to who starts a company, and in 6 months you're going to replace them with a real management professional or something. My advice, if I could be so bold and use that word, which is really always tricky to use though, is you have to stay connected to the technology the whole time. And you just can't, you can't pretend that because you became a manager of people that somehow technology isn't at the root of your job. And always just think about yourself in the shoes of the people you manage and the conversations that they want to have with you. You don't want to be like ships passing in the night where you're having a conversation about abstract strategizing and they want to ask you about the defect count or the scale or what's going on with the usage of the product. Yeah.
So what kind of things did you do to build the culture of Microsoft Office or the culture of your Windows team while you were there?
In any particular dimension, or like just some cultural attribute that you're curious about?
I guess managing and motivating people and getting people behind like the vision of.
Oh, it's a great question. One of the things that was so fascinating about when I got to join the Office team was really this problem that the business faced of, like I described, there was like a Word business and an Excel business and a PowerPoint business, but the marketing team had decided that there was just more money to be made and customers to be served if you connected all the products together and then sold them at once. And it really came out of the early Macintosh days, which was, it turns out there was this very high correlation on the Macintosh. If you bought one of Word or Excel, you would later on buy the other one. And that was because the Macintosh made it really easy to use more than one program at a time, whereas on the early versions of Windows, that wasn't the case. And so the marketing team was like just being marketing and seeing what was going on in the marketplace and going, well, think of it from linear equations. If half the people buy both at a certain price, that's two of them. But if we price it in the middle and then get like 80% of the people to buy both, then there's just more, that's just like good marketing and sales. So they started to do that. The problem was the engineering team was still making a product to compete with only Lotus 1-2-3 and a product to compete with WordPerfect and a product to compete with software publishing. And it was extreme. Like the competition or the battles that went on. In fact, it was fascinating. Like I went to one meeting once and there was literally this fight between two of the different products over whether or not the toolbar buttons should have color icons in them or not. And one group was literally like, look, we're competing with WordPerfect, so we don't need color. And the other group is, well, we're competing with Lotus 1-2-3, and we think color is an advantage. Well, we don't want to do the work for color. We have to do the work for color. And then like, I just keep going. There was another meeting, because that was like a whole thing. And then we have another whole thing, which was toolbars should be 15 pixels high, according to one of those groups, and they should be 16 pixels high according to another group. And that was like a whole thing. And so part of what we had to do, and I'm not speaking by myself, I mean, this was part of the team that was asked to build Office as opposed to these apps, was we had to deliver a product by building a culture of collaboration and working together, and one that was much more about building a consensus for changes that we had to drive. And there's a lot of lessons at the details of how you structure a team and organize. But the key was we had to get, and finally, I remember the day that was a breakthrough. The person charged with running all of the Word team said at a meeting, okay, look, here's the deal. When I'm competing with WordPerfect, I realized that my most competitive feature to win against WordPerfect is Excel. And once we had that breakthrough, that was like a big moment, because what happened was he realized that there was only so much he could pile into Word to compete with WordPerfect. He realized that Excel plus Word was just going to be more competitive than WordPerfect by itself. And so that was sort of, we had to build the team and the design process and the thought process, the customer problem process, all around solving that sort of problem. And it was a journey. I mean, it started from the very fact that most of the people in this team that were tasked with building Office had come from the Word team and the Excel team. But the people who were left over in the Word team and the Excel team thought that the people who left were traitors. And I remember we did this big giant presentation called "We Are Not Coconuts." And we presented and we said that everybody who's left behind thinks we're coconuts, and we got dumb when we joined this Office team. And they really did. And it was a big transformation of that. And we had a similar kind of thing that happened when I came over to Windows. We had, there was the networking team that competed on networking and the storage team that competed on storage, but people only bought Windows. And so it didn't matter at the silo level. You had to really bring the team together with one plan and one vision. The book that I co-wrote with my friend at Harvard is literally the process that we went through to create the shared plans for how to build a product. At a crazy scale that you won't see in a startup, there's like 6,000 engineers on the Windows team. So it was kind of a big project. Yeah, all the way in the back.
From my perspective, Sinofsky owns a lot of the success to external factors, such as luck, because you say yes to a lot of things. What internal factors do you think made your career?
So that just the pure brilliance isn't coming through in this talk? Huh. Oh, let me work on that. For me, I wish I ascribe a lot of it to luck and just the opportunity to work with really amazing people. I know there's nothing but a cliche answer to that one. I wish there was something more organic or more.
But from your experience, do you think it's because the time you put into your study and or networking part, or?
It certainly wasn't chemistry. I honestly, everyone who, Ben Horowitz just came out with an amazing book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which everyone has to go and read. I'm not saying buy because it's not a pitch to buy the book, but borrow it from a friend who bought it or something. But it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And one of the things he said about writing the book was he didn't want to write a book, he was reading all these books when he was working on his company that had its ups and downs. And they said stuff like, make sure you work with great people. And that was like a book. And he's like, crap, I didn't realize that. I thought I was only supposed to work with dumb people. I'm paraphrasing it, but to me, the people that I worked with made all the difference. And I don't think you're going to ever hear anybody who reaches any level of success say anything but that. But it really is the most important thing. Because everybody who joins a team, everybody at different levels of management, everybody in a company are all have flaws. They're not good at some things and they're good at others. And assembling a team, it's definitely like when you get the whole Justice League of America together. Everybody's hopefully got a superpower, but they all have kryptonite, and that's a big part of. I think I definitely have worked on being really deliberate about that in terms of the teams I join and the people, where my skills a match, where when we filled out the team, did we fill out. Like, as a great example that we talk about in our book, which is making it sound like I'm doing a book tour, but I'm really not. It's like 6 years old already, and I'm sure it's out of print. But at Microsoft, there's a core engineering relationship between development, testing, and what we call program management, which in the Valley is product management. And it's really like who writes the specifications and the vision, who writes the code, and who makes sure the other two guys are not lying about what they said they would do. And when we, a key part of like helping to ensure success is when we fill out these teams, we look at the strengths and weaknesses of each of those three people because they're peers in an organization. And so we want to make sure that they complement each other and they compensate for each other in a great way. And I think for me, I've always looked at joining teams where I felt like it maximized the things that I thought I brought, and it helped me to with the things that I wasn't as good at. I hope that wasn't too much of a weird answer. Yep.
Seems like you've made a transition from like the business side of things to more finance venture capital. Did that change your perspective on the process at all? And if so, how did that work?
Sure. Well, I think one of the reasons that that I really enjoy the opportunity to work with Andreessen Horowitz is because the people on the investing side that are general partners, which I'm not, or a board partner, which is what I am, we tend to all be people who are either operators at companies or founders of companies. And so, in fact, none of us are finance people. I think out of the 8 GPs, only 2 of them have MBAs, if I do that correctly, because it's Scott and Dixon. I think only 2 of the 8 are even MBAs, although coincidentally they both went to Harvard, which I think is just weird, because you don't see them in the Valley. They're all at oh, you're going to look this up now and correct me? Okay. So I actually think that one of the neat things about the way Andreessen Horowitz works is that you get to draw on the resources of the whole firm, because there's a whole bunch of partners that are really finance people, that are really legal people, that are really marketing people, that are really sales and engagement or talent people. And so my job is to actually focus on the founder and enabling in the product side, or scaling business and leadership and management. Like a company I talked to this morning is all about trying to build out an ecosystem for their product, which is something that I've spent a lot of time doing in my past. How do you ignite developers to build on your platform? How do you communicate the value of those developers to your customers, and so on? So I would say I don't think of myself even a little bit on the finance side. I think of myself as helping the firm run the investments that they do, but really from a board perspective, which it doesn't have to be financial. And do we have an answer? No, it's too much. It's too hard.
John Farrell went to Stanford.
John did go to Stanford. Yeah.
From what you're seeing at Andreessen Horowitz, can you talk about any trends, or like what is happening in the States? What's the meaning of the investment?
Sure. Well, I think let me just pick on. There's so many dimensions to that. There's like what's happening with financing of startup companies, what's happening with different spaces. But let me just talk about one thing that I spend some of my time on that I just think is particularly exciting, and it's rooted in the fact that I worked on Office for so long, which is what I think of as a dramatic transformation that's taking place in what we officially call productivity software. So Office is productivity software. It's the name it was given by some analyst 20 years ago or something. And what's happened is that, look, we reached a level of engineering success and product success and optimization on the laptop using Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Access, and a bunch of other tools. And then, in the past couple of years, primarily since the iPhone, all of a sudden, the platform has opened up where productivity is no longer defined by what happens on a keyboard and a mouse on a laptop, but by what can happen on your phone or your tablet. And that's unleashing a broad wave of incredible creativity across where these products are no longer looked at as word processing, spreadsheet, database, email. They're actually just redefining the boundaries between products. Let me give you one example of a company that is not an Andreessen Horowitz portfolio company, that is just an interesting product that I happen to see, which is a company. There's a guy who does a lot of really interesting blog posts, and he goes by the Twitter handle Asimco. His name is Horace. And he and a co-founder have built a presentation graphics product at a company called Pixa, Pixxa. And what's really fascinating about it is it seems like it's a product that's like a PowerPoint product. It's like a way to make images show up on a big giant screen. But in fact, it connects up to a database. And so it's not just for showing bullet points and boring you to death like other professors, none of whom are here, might do in a classroom, but it connects up to a database. So if you wanted to show like world population growth over a map, or you want to show 4 dimensions that are really common if you want to show X, Y with bubble size and color all moving, like you see in famous TED Talks and stuff, this connects up to the data and lets you build those kind of presentations that otherwise you would never figure out how to build with a tool. And it puts that power in sort of your typical hyper advanced presentation storytelling person. And that's a product that only runs on an iPad. And you create your presentation on an iPad, you show it on your iPad. In fact, you can show it from your phone, and you can walk your presentation and drive it like the bubbles moving around from your phone. So it changes all the boundaries of what you would think of as a traditional space and productivity software.
What did you call it?
I didn't call it, they did. It's called Pixa, Pixxa. And it's in the App Store, you can download it. Again, that's not a plug, I'm just stating a fact. It's not a portfolio company or anything. And I think it's just a great example to me of like this space is so wide open because of course everybody has jobs that is using these devices to get stuff done. I got that backwards, but there's just going to be a whole new series of tools that come out as a result of that, and it's happening in all of the kind of spaces that you can think of for doing work, and I think it's just so exciting. I said Scott Dixon.
Lars.
Oh, Lars is new, so I don't count him in my
Jeff
mock.
Jordan and John O'Farrell. Granted, Peter Levine attended Sloan, but he didn't finish.
Yeah, but he's like me. He teaches at Harvard. But Mark and Ben, no, and
Ben's got feelings on MBAs too.
yeah. But Peter is interesting because he was a CEO of several open source companies, and now he teaches at Stanford. I know that's like totally uncool to mention, but
It's all right, just get him at the big hack in April.
yeah. And someone else had their hand up. I saw it right here. Yeah.
So what are some of the lessons that you learned as you saw Microsoft grow, and which of those lessons do you think should be applied to new startups? What sort of advice would you give to those founders?
Sure. Well, I think the lessons of growth are going to be the lessons of growth in any company in any industry. I mean, growth. There's nothing specific about Microsoft. We're always just, once you reach a certain scale, you get these internal feelings that are like, oh, I remember when things used to be easier. And I can tell you that literally since the mid-1990s, I remember the first time hearing from people at Microsoft, oh, I remember when this used to be easy. I mean, 20 years ago. Like, it's crazy how soon, like, those, and it happens in all sorts of companies. What I would say, the most interesting thing about technology companies is like this theory of disruption and how important it is if you're in the technology space to really understand it's not a theory. It kind of got invented in the business departments at Harvard. It really should be in the physics department because it's like a law of nature. And it's not like trivial to just you go, oh yeah, disruption. And like in this area, people love to talk about disrupting existing businesses. It turns out once you already have a successful business, you're going to get disrupted. So you have to mentally equip yourself. Like you can't, like think of it this way, like all these people in the Bay Area talking about disrupting, they are disrupting someone. And they're probably disrupting someone who was successful, which is someone you guys all hope to be. So do you see how important it is to really internalize disruption? It's not like you can spend your whole life just breaking other companies. Eventually, you are going to be the company that all these people in a room like this are thinking about, ooh, we're going to go screw with this guy's life. And it's very, very real. Just the other day in class at Harvard, we teach a class called Digital Innovation this semester. And one of the things we did, and I actually wrote this as a public blog post, that was called Shoulda, Woulda, Coulda. And it was all about BlackBerry. and the disruption that took place at Research in Motion or BlackBerry. It's super fun for all of us to joke about, out comes a phone without a keyboard and poof, you're gone. And that's what it plays like. I literally, on the way over here, I was listening to CNBC, which is just, don't bother. But, okay, that was not an anti-plug or a slam. I just was making a joke. They were doing this, they do this thing in the afternoon, I guess, at the market close, around the horn, and they ask for everybody for a stock of the day, like that's some sort of telemetry. And someone said, I know it's going to sound stupid, but I'm in on BlackBerry. And they all just started yelling at this person, like, what are you doing here? What are you saying? And it's easy to make those jokes now, but realize where they came from and how successful they were. First, everyone on CNBC had a BlackBerry. 100% penetration. Every single person on Wall Street, every person at the Pentagon, every person in Hollywood, there were BlackBerries, had 100% penetration. If you had a mobile device that did email, you had a BlackBerry. And in the span of 3 years, they literally evaporated. And someone in the room, not to name names, has one still, I think.
I could tell you a whole story on why I have that.
It actually would have to be a story, because...
I'm going to tell you a story.
I'm listening.
Actually, I don't want the mic on. So I was teaching an executive program, and the head of BlackBerry sales was in my class. And they, in the class, convinced me that this next BlackBerry, they are salespeople, right? I mean, convinced me that, this is going to be really different and so forth. And I was so convinced that not only did I buy it, I bought $10,000 of BlackBerry stock. And then and then it basically dropped by like 40%. So I spent like $5,000 on this BlackBerry. So I'm not giving it up now.
Cool. Hang in there. Hang in there. The co-founder of BlackBerry is a Harvard Business School graduate. I've actually sat on panels with him. He's an incredibly smart, brilliant man who started the company. And the fascinating thing about it is, to your question, like, what do you do when every product dimension you can dream up gets inverted in the marketplace in importance? And so what we did in class is just made a list of all of the elements of BlackBerry. So you start with the keyboard, but you color, screen, Wi-Fi, pager network, and 2G versus 4G. Like the business model and charging the carriers and where the money came from. Java, secure email versus open email. And the list is, it filled, they use these blackboards that swipe up and down. It filled 2 of them high of these things that were attributes of the BlackBerry that were different on the iPhone. And it's one thing if you've got a big established company and someone comes out with basically a cheaper version of your product. There are many classic examples of this. A really old one in computers is IBM mainframes got cloned legally by the guy who invented them, called Gene Amdahl. And he started a whole company building clones of IBM mainframes and just charging less. And it turns out, if you're a giant company with the resources of the galaxy like IBM, and someone just has a lower price, you can totally win that competition and keep charging a high price because you have all the other things, customer relationships, application library, service, support, like an arsenal of tools that the new entrant doesn't have. And so you generally fend off one dimension of competition. But if all of a sudden somebody changes the business model, changes every element of your product, I don't know. There's no magic answer about what to do. But the only thing that's certain is if you become successful enough in your business, someone is going to sit around trying to figure out how to do that. And so it's kind of all cool now to be the disruptor. But just unless you don't want to be successful, just realize you're going to be the target someday. And so you start to have to think about that. And so one of the things you could do is start to think about, like, what are all the assumptions that get built into your product and your sales and your organization that someone is going to go and question or invert or assume something different. And I think, to me, that's one of the most interesting things about large organizations as they become successful is you lose track of all of the assumptions that get baked into what you're doing. And you have whole organizations. Like one of the topics that came up with the BlackBerry case was well, why didn't they just switch to 4G? Well, I mean, they're the world's experts in radios. I kid you not. Like these people knew radios. Like unbelievable depth of radios. But the thing was, they had an entire organization that from the day they started work, they said, okay, here's the deal with radios. We know you're new, you have a PhD in radios, whatever. You can never consume battery power. So whatever you do, consume less battery. And whatever you do, just fewer bytes over the wire. Because that's all we care about. Do not use the battery, few bytes over the wire. And that's like your new hire orientation as the radio guy. And so now they have an army of people, the world's best radio people, that have been constructed to not send bytes over the wire and drain the battery. And along comes an iPhone, and the first one, like the battery lasts like what, like an hour. And of course everybody jokes, yeah, it lasts for half a day because you're using it all the time because it's so cool to use. But it's also, the first one was over the 2G network, and then the iPhone 3 came out. And it's draining the battery because you're using it, because you're sending all these bytes over the wire, and you're using a really high-speed data rate because you like what's getting over the wire. And everybody at BlackBerry is like, this is terrible. Like you're running around with charger. Plus, they sealed the battery in it so you can't replace it. So everything about the product looked wrong to those radio people. But it's not like the two radio people. It's the whole company. And it's not like an opinion. It's their DNA. And that's like the essence of what happens in a large organization. And it's not dumb. It's never dumb. It's just that you built the whole business. $10,000 worth of stock on that premise. You can move on now. We'd be okay with it. Okay, one more repeat, and then I think we'll call it quit.
I wanted to touch on the topic of retaining talent. In my generation, I mean, I have a lot of friends and a lot of engineers, they jump ship like every year or every 2 years. What strategies have you learned to attract and retain talent in both startups and large corporations?
Sure.
Because, you lose a lot of knowledge every time someone jumps ship.
Sure. Well, I tend to not think of it as jumping ship because I think I just believe in how the marketplace for talent works. And ultimately, if somebody's leaving, that's a signal to you, not a signal about the person. It's a signal that there's something going on in your organization. So every person leaving, it's not an opportunity to keep them. It's an opportunity to understand what made them leave. And you need to understand and adapt your organization. And there are some of those dynamics that you can never change. If an organization is large and somebody wants to work in an organization of 10 people, you can't simulate a 10-person organization in a 10,000-person one. There's no simulation at all. But if a person is leaving because they don't feel there's opportunity, or they don't like the kind of work that they're doing, or they would prefer to work on different kinds of products, there's lots of things that are under your control in an organization that's a signal to you. So I tend to not think about it as retaining, and I certainly very, very rarely in my own career sort of had these retention dialogues with somebody where I was trying to keep them. I would have my opinions, but ultimately it is a signal for the organization, not as much about what the person is doing wrong, but what the organization should be doing to make sure that they understand from that experience. But the free market does work. And there are always going to be people who continue to be opportunistic, and my advice is always, you can play that for a certain amount of time, but eventually someone's going to ask you, what have you done in depth? And want to know, what do you know from beginning to end, from top to bottom? And if you've changed too often, you might be looking at yourself 10 years from now, and you realize that all you have are 10 jobs to show. And then that becomes a challenge for you as much as for the next employer. Well, it was wonderful to talk to all of you. I really appreciate the opportunity. You guys have so much fun and excitement ahead of you, and you're in such an amazing, energy-filled sky deck that I wish you the very best. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share those thoughts with you. Thank you.